Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Charlotte Parkin and I serve as the Director for Research and Partnerships at the London Global Gateway for the University of Notre Dame. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you to our second London Research Seminar for Spring 2022. And if you haven't joined us before or you're new to Notre Dame, just to give you a bit of background, we are a large Catholic university based out in Indiana, which really values research and undergraduate teaching. We are global in scope with many gateways and centres around the world. And I have to give a particular shout out today to Kylemore in Ireland, which is one of them. More about that in a moment. The largest of which of these gateways is our London Global Gateway, and we are the ones who are hosting this lecture today. Now, before we get on with the rest of the seminar, I want to do a bit of housekeeping just so that everyone who's here today knows what's going on. You are welcome to keep your videos on during the seminar, and we encourage you to use the chat window, which is the bottom, to submit your questions. There'll be some conversation at the end of the presentations. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, you can put them in the chat box. And please, but if you are coming up with ideas and thoughts, please put them in the chat box as the conversation is going on. Now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speakers. We have Fay Stevens and Lisa Caulfield. And this is the first seminar, which I'm so excited for, and of many, we hope, that will feature not only the work of faculty at the London Global Gateway, but also the collaborative work that's been taking place with faculty and staff at other gateways in the NDI network, such as our Kylemore Gateway. It is therefore a pleasure to be welcoming our Irish neighbours to joining us this evening. Fay Stevens is an archaeologist and an award-winning professor and researcher. She has worked in archaeological projects in Armenia, Europe and UK, and has travelled on academic research opportunities, including places such as Syria, Jordan, USA and Japan. She specialises in the philosophy of phenomenology in archaeology and was part of a groundbreaking project at UCL where they were developing phenomenological research methods and thinking in the terms of landscape archaeology. This includes research into the ritual deposition of material cultures, into watery locales, and the development of new courses around sustainability and water, which includes river and tides, which she's currently teaching at the London Global Gateway. A biography of the River Thames, London, for the University of Notre Dame, London faculty, and the environmental conservation and sustainable thinking has also been something she's been working on, and natural places as heritage for the University of Notre Dame pre-college programme. So that is our first speaker this evening. And our second speaker will be Lisa Caulfield. And Lisa is the director of the Kylemore Global Centre in Connemara, Ireland. Lisa completed her MA in Modern Irish Literature from the National University in Maynooth, County Kildare, and has worked for the University of Notre Dame since 2004. In 2014, Lisa was appointed the director of the Kylemore Abbey Global Centre, and by 2018, she had created an additional opportunity for ND junior semester abroad taking place at the National University of Galway. Lisa teaches the Immunity to Change module on the Executive Education Programme that is annually hosted at Kylemore. And trust me, you need to check out Kylemore. It's a beautiful location. And she is responsible for curating the interdisciplinary programmes, courses, residencies and retreats that are hosted at the Global Centre. Tonight, Lisa and Faye will be discussing water sustainability, biodiversity, ritual disposition, contemplation and cultural references to liquid states, water types that transformed and are transformed by the sacred. And it's something they've been working on together. So I'm going to hand it now over to them.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. We're both delighted to be here for a number of reasons. One, to share and open up the conversation around this very important topic of sustainability and water. Two, to celebrate a wonderful collaboration that has been taking place and continues to grow between the two of us. And three, to share the work that we have put together for this seminar for you. And we've had some great discussions around that as well. The plan for us is both of us are going to give a presentation on the area of sacred water that we are looking at for this discussion. And then we're going to give you a little proposition and open up the discussion for all of you who are here. And of course, it's a very warm welcome to all of you who are here. I'm going to pass over to Lisa, so Lisa can say something, and Lisa's going to do the first presentation for this. So Lisa, hello, lovely to see you, and over to you.
Hello, Faye, and thank you, Charlotte, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak today. I find this a topic that's near and dear to my heart and has been for a very long time, and it's become a sort of passion project in a lot of the conversations that we have at Kylemore. So it's a real honor to connect with the London Gateway in this way, and for Kylemore to connect with London's faculty and to see the sort of budding conversations that we're having. And I'm really proud to be speaking on behalf of Kylemore and to have this great conversations that we've been having with Faye. So thank you, Faye, for the invitation. I have to also thank Alice Tyrrell, who has put Faye and I together from the London Global Gateway. And if it wasn't for Alice, I wouldn't have formed this great friendship and sort of mission and values, looking forwards to all of the great things that we have in the pipeline. So thank you, Alice, for connecting us. I'm going to share my start with my slides. And so if you just bear with me. All right, Faye, is that okay?
Looks great, Lisa.
Thank you. So when considering, I suppose, the topic of liquid states and a closer look at sustainability and sacred water, I thought of just framing it in what we do at Kylemore and the various work that we've both respectively been involved with over the last year and a half. And I find that over the years, when I'm working with students, our students who come to Ireland to study for the semester, what I've observed is a sort of an anxiety in terms of climate change. And there's a sort of deep and pervasive hunger for a less sort of fragmented way of existing within our landscape. And I often find that when we have programs in Kylemore, this sort of immersive programming that we like to promote with connecting with the landscape goes a long way. And so often the answer to this anxiety that I've seen and witnessed with our students is to find pathways for a more integrated way of understanding and inhabiting the world, and finding ways that just take our time to exist and to be present for one another. So what must we change if we are to live in a sustainable relationship with the landscape? And that's one of the questions that I look at. What role do our moral and spiritual values play in responding to an ecological crisis? So when researching another series that Faye has contributed to, we started a global dialogues discussion with Think Indie on the platform, in which we addressed the worsening water crisis. And I realized that water was a topic that united us with all our Notre Dame networks throughout all of our global gateways and centers. And so there's a lot of work that's being done at the moment globally on addressing the sort of anxiety that exists around water and our use with it, and the existential kind of experience of it, right? So from Mumbai to Santiago, we found a recurring water topic of this research and work that we're doing on water. So I just thought, in preparation for today's discussion, I would enter into this conversation from from what I teach on the pre-college program too, which is from an Irish literary perspective, which is why you see Lady Gregory and W.B. Yeats on the screen at the moment. It's maybe just to view it as a sort of portal into the topic, and for us to think about a way in which we can approach sustainability from different angles. And I think that's really kind of the way Faye and I have been exploring some of these ideas and concepts that we have started to banter about. So I can, Charlotte, keep me on schedule, because I can bang on about this for a while, but just to talk a bit from the angle of Irish literature and myths. And this course that I taught was an interesting way for us to look at ancient texts and the oral culture of early Celtic people. And what we found when we read the text as a group is that we have this real connection in Irish literature to the landscape. And it's this attachment to Irish legends that was resurrected in our 1900s, that we have this literary revival that creates the Irish nation. So it's the work of Yeats and Gregory who look far back into the past of these ancient legends and myths and help define the nation that's forming in the 1920s. And what we find by studying these tales is that the nation really is intermingled with the archaeology of the landscape. So the Irish story has a deep sense of place, a deep reverence for place to begin with. And in the oral tradition, and the names of places are crucially important, and stories are set in the physical landscape of the country. So even the physical characteristics may not be described in greater detail. If you have a place name, you can refer to it and the image of it and the landscape around it, so that in the oral culture, you can name a place and understand where it's situated. So there's a deep sense of place within the Irish psyche, I would argue. So this landscape is a very vital landscape for informing Irish myth and legend. And it's vital. It's whether it's imbued in the rivers or in the lakes or the mountains or the hills of the valley, they're seen as sacred places. So this idea of a deep ireland, the sense of place that fuses to a material environment, this sort of historical experience that's a lived reality. And in this slide, you sort of see the layers of the Irish landscape. And you have this, you have the material environment in which we exist in now, and then the sort of historical and social and cultural evolution. And for Ireland, that's called duchas, which is like a deep sense of Ireland. There's this deep sense of fusing with the material environment. And what we do in this course is we talk about the place lore. So the Dunshachas, which is relied on a narrative, but it's not scientific. It's not a scientific response to the landscape. So what we see is that when we study the Irish literature, there's a value in this sort of relationship between community and the environment. And the environment often informs our social behaviors and helps us form our tales and rituals. So it's not really being developed from the outside, it's being developed from within, a sort of accumulation of organically connecting to the landscape that links us to generations in the past. And I think this material practice of, is very symbolic for the Irish psyche. It's very important in our understanding our cultural landscape. So it gives us a real sense of who we are as an Irish people. So I think that and you see the evolution of time. You see these in monuments like you have with the Irish. The ring fort fences in this Mesolithic house, which is usually waterscape as well. And then you see the evolution of these great monuments, right, where you have a deep connection with the land. And so when we're talking in terms of the sacred and water, I think Irish literature gives us a great way of entry into talking about this from sustainability and from that angle. And it gives us a reverence for the landscapes. It's imbued in the Irish psyche. And I would argue that it's imbued even to modern day, we're very connected to our territories were very little, very little movement. There's a lot of, you're identified with your county, your parish, your locale. So even to the modern day, there's a great sense in Ireland and in the West as well. There's just a real sense of this deep connection to the landscape. And I think that informs us and how we think of the sacred. I have the honor and privilege to work in a beautiful place. This slide is Kylemore. This is it's situated in a really picturesque valley known as a karst landscape. So these were formed by the mountains and the lakes were formed by this glacial deposits, and you have this amazing bounty of material richness, as in the rocks and what you see in the sort of granite on those beautiful mountains, and then that kind of clear reflection. And when we talk about sort of contemplation and the environment, it's just when you see images of like this and you situate your person in this area, it kind of imbues your experience of awe and wonder. And I think places like Kylemore contribute to that in a very sort of meaningful ways. And so I would say that, in terms of Kylemore, it has a wonderful reference point for ecology, for community, and for economy within a very remote part of Ireland. And so really it gives us a really kind of, in terms of where we situate the sacred and why we pick this place as sacred, it's really reflected in the landscape. So, and Kylemore, it means big wood in Irish, Cuailmore, which is referring to an ancient forest. So again, playing back to that deep sense of Ireland and connection over time. And I suppose the valley that it's in is just you don't expect a castle to be on your next turn, right? So there's an investment in a family that came in the mid 19th century by the Mitchell Henrys, and they were drawn to this area for its fishing and for its great hunting, actually, and obviously for its beauty. So they built this sort of castle that's 35,000 square feet. There's 65 rooms, and in 1921 it was taken over by a community of Benedictines, and they created this enclosed monastic order. And what's really beautiful about this is that the Archbishop of Tuam at the time had said that in order for it to be an enclosed monastery, they designated the mountains that surround the castle as the nuns' enclosure. So since 1921, the mountains have served as the enclosure for this monastic order. And then I'll just talk briefly about, the Benedictine community and the idea of contemplative ecology. And, the Benedictines use a contemplative approach to everything they do, really. And they are in a set ritual of prayer 3 times a day, including their meal times being connected to their prayer. So the Benedictines have a really strong sense of place and sacred and existing in this sort of sphere, which is really imbues the area, and you get a kind of appreciation of what Kylemore embodies by being witness to the Benedictine experience. So this idea of contemplative ecology is an approach to ecological thought and a practice that can help, restore our sense of the earth as a sacred place. And it's a particular way of thinking about engaging with ecological concerns that are rooted in a distinctive spiritual practice. And so it's interesting to feel their ebb and flow, because they work and they pray in all of the same space, and yet it's also a vibrant estate for tourists to come. And it once had a primary school. And the university, as Charlotte mentioned in the introduction, took over the castle, or a portion of the castle, in 2016, in which now we've sort of carried on the mantle of education in the west of Ireland. And so our programs try to incorporate as much as we can of the Benedictine life, and for people to get exposed to that sort of monastic way. Now, the nuns have really taken on, after the Laudato Si encyclical, they really took on this idea of integral ecology, of really, they do it by practicing their contemplation, but they really have taken on the way they run the estate, and the way they produce their productions, and the way they mitigate their impact onto the landscape. So there's a lot of work that's being done to reduce the carbon footprint of the tourist, because this is one of the major tourist destinations. What's interesting about Kylemore and where it's situated, and tying into the theme of water, is the pilgrimage and the route of pilgrimage that's around Kylemore. And there's a picture of our students at the top of the mountain behind Kylemore, and in the middle is a pilgrimage to Mame, and then the Eastburn Compass is another place where there's a holy well, and then there's St. Bridget's Well. There's there's close to 3,000 early monastic settlements of settlements in Ireland, and I would say close to 1,000 of the settlements which you'd have holy wells affiliated with them. So this identification with water is intrinsic in the people who engage with the landscape. Even the sort of procession that they do around sites like Mame, there's the Stations of a Cross around it. So you engage with the landscape, you pray at different stations, and you're in this valley where you're contemplating your existence in it. So I would argue that holy wells, Whelan is another holy well that's across from Kylemore, and pilgrimage is very very much a part of that deep Ireland, the deep sense of knowledge of the landscape. So pilgrimage, again, is a practice of which you learn to integrate back into the landscape, and it's a very important way for Irish the Irish tradition to join at certain times of the year to do these pilgrimages. And so we still have a very rich sort of practice that happens in and around Kylemore, and it's something that whether students want to do it or they feel the call to do it. So it's this unexplained connection to being a part of a tradition that has been evident for generations before them, and that you can witness that as things as you see our students engage with the landscape and then participate in places like Kylemore for these pilgrimages. And I guess just to close, I had mentioned as a reading material this Salt Water in the Blood. And I bring I share this with our students about like where Ireland is situated. We're off the coast of England. We're situated in the Atlantic. So water surrounds us, right? We get the brunt end of the Atlantic, especially in the West. So subject to storms. We say in the West there's 350 days of rain out of the 365 days, right? So Ireland, Irish people have a real profound sense of water and their exposure to it, and so there is this sort of negotiation about water, and there's a lot of political inferences with water in Ireland and not paying for water, and for this idea that we have it in abundance, which I also think is important in these sort of sustainability conversations that we have. We in the British Isles have this abundance, say, of water and access to water, where it's a very stark contrast to what you see in other parts of the world. And the beauty of I guess living in the West is you're exposed to so many people who have this artists and others that have this really great connection to living in sort of a liminal space, in a place where there's, it's not easy to exist in. You're on the edge of Europe here. And that's what I like about this sort of satellite map. You're living in a liminal space on the edge of something. And what does that mean when you negotiate the elements? And this woman, Eski Britton, who is a phenomenal surfer, but and a marine scientist, and she works in the West Coast about the power to heal. And I think that when we're talking about sustainability, we sometimes, we can defer to things that can be maybe very siloed. But I think when we're having a conversation around sustainability studies, it has to be multidisciplinary, and we have to share this a renewed engagement with the land. And I think when you teach, Irish literature, or you go outside the sort of comfort zones, then you can access it from a different angle. So that's really a sort of Kylemore perspective of the west of Ireland, and some of the conversations that I've been having with Faye and thinking about when we entered the sacred. How do we do it, and how do we address the water crisis that we're experiencing?
Thanks so much, Lisa. That's absolutely great. And sorry, my screen was just fluttering there. This felt sense of the sustainability, this felt sense of water, and this broad spectrum of the notion of water as sacred, and how sacred water and thinking about water as sacred is absolutely fundamental to sustainable thinking. So I shall lead on from that, because this is a companion piece to Lisa's presentation, and share some images and some thoughts with you, and then we will open it up for some discussion as well. Right, let me just. Okay, Lisa, can you see that all okay? Great. All right. So the work that I've been doing recently on water and sustainability, particularly for the London faculty here, is part of a wider body of work of research and publications and engagement with water. Water in our archaeological past, water in a very landscape-based context, and water and materiality. And I just want to give you a context for that as well. In fact, it's what I call sort of knowing water, these fluid pedagogies of how we understand what we do in the way that we do. And when we look to our archaeological record, we can see these fantastic engagements that people have with their water worlds, and of how that can help us understand our contemporary lifeways as well. One of the ways I explored that through our fluid pedagogies was from a new course I did at the University of Oxford last year called Waterscapes, where we covered the prehistory of Britain and Europe, and engaged with fantastic examples of water strategies from people 5,000–6,000 years ago. So here we have to the top left a carved river pebble that is both fish and human face from a site known as Lipensky Veer that is placed on the side of the River Danube at a point of a large whirlpool, at a point where fish migrate through the large whirlpool. So it's a site that has a strategy, a water strategy that's sustainable, it's effective, it's engaging with good food and good eating, it's engaging with a particular course of the river, but there's something else going on there as well. And these carved river pebbles give us an insight into that. We also have to this top right image here what one might refer to as particular water cultures. And this is a well-known water culture from Iron Age Europe known as Laten. From Lake Neuchatel in Switzerland. And in Lake Neuchatel in Switzerland, people did many things, but one of the most dominant things they did was to place metalwork into water, and metalwork that can fall under a banner widely and slightly problematically of Celtic art, but comprising a very curling, twirling, curvilinear design that somehow echoes the curling, twirling, meandering nature of water. And this is seen as a particular type of water culture engaged with the river, engaged with the lake, I should say. And then to the bottom left there, to connect us beautifully to Ireland, is an image from the River Shannon. And the River Shannon having also a history, a palimpsest, layers and layers and layers of evidence for people's engagement with the water, from fish traps and from strategies of living well by the water, to also depositing and placing things into the water, which a lot of the literature will refer to as ritual and or sacred water. What is the meaning of water is the title of a book by Veronica Strang, and it's very well worth reading. She engages with a number of case studies there and explores this idea of the meaning of water as a whole chapter on holy water itself. And I've explored that through a range of cross-disciplinary perspectives and engagement with confluences. I take hydrophones to confluences, places where two particular waters meet, and record with a hydrophone the recording of the place where those two waters meet. And on this case, I've been collaborated with Dr. Rhys Trimble for a performance lecture that engages with the hydrophone recording, with language, and a strong sense of place that led to this publication, Liquidscapes. There's also an idea of ontologies, the nature of being, the relationship between things, and how the sacred nature of water relates to that as well. And this is one example of how I've engaged with that. It was supposed to be a physical paper that was to be given in Portugal in 2020, which became a revised online project. And here I take what one might say is really deeply sacred water, which is the ancient thermal waters that percolate up into the thermal springs of Bath, a UNESCO World Heritage City. This water is thousands of years old, and we see a whole range of archaeological and historical evidence, one might say contemporary evidence. It's a highly popular touristic site now that shows people engagement with this unique water type, these ancient molecules. And here we have to the left the goddess of Sulis, Minerva, a wonderful statue found at the Roman baths in Bath. I include her here because there is a feeling that the Sulis relates to the Irish for sul, which is to have the eye, to have sight. So to have eye, to have sight and power related to the water, Sulis, Minerva. And here we have another Iron Age goddess of Tanit from Carthage, and this coin was found along the river from where Sulis Minerva dwelled in the Roman baths in Bath. So I took a water pilgrimage in this particular case. I stopped at the point in the River Avon in Bath where the ancient thermal water molecules, 6,000 years old, bubble into the contemporary River Avon, the world of Sulis Minerva, the sacred goddess of water. And I walked along the meandering riverbank for miles to the village of Saltford, where this coin was found. This coin has traveled from Tunisia to this place found in the river at Saltford. And my walk is many things. It's a conversation between me, Sulis Minerva, and Tanit as we walk, and I walk with them along this riverbank. But I'm following the flow of water. I'm following the flow of the river, and I'm following these ancient sacred molecules of thermal water that inspired the building of the great Roman baths as we know them now. We could also talk about sacred epistemologies, the knowledge of understanding, through water as a transdisciplinary lens through which we can engage with. So here we're talking about the River Thames, and of course I'm here in the London faculty, and the River Thames is a 10-minute walk away from me and the focus of the Rivers and Tides course that I'm currently teaching there. Here you see a map of the Thames, in this purple meandering classic riverine line here. But all of these other lines are all the tributaries that feed into the Thames themselves. And these tributaries have names, and they have stories and mythologies associated with them. And there's wonderful writings and descriptions. I think there could be some more research around the culture of the tributaries and how they relate to the Thames themselves. But this tributary, the Walbrook, has many stories to tell. It is a tributary that was the focus of a repeated deposition of many artifacts over long extended periods of time, some of those being Roman. And in fact, this image here is one of those famous artifacts known as the Bloomberg tablets, writing tablet. And I include that, Charlotte, because Charlotte has done some wonderful work on the Bloomberg tablets from this particular site. There's a nice connection there with you, Charlotte, as well. It is also the site of a temple, a sacred temple from the Roman period, known as the Temple of Mithras, the Mithraic temple, here reimagined, let's say repositioned, placed in its close to its original site and conserved by Bloomberg in their building of the Bloomberg site. And part of that, so we've got this ancient hydrology, geology of landscape, these named tributaries, this sacred temple, these artifacts, these writing tablets, and many other artifacts themselves. And then we have modernity right by there as well. And this is a fantastic installation of 3 sculptural places on the corner, 3 corners of the Bloomberg building, right next to the Walbrook, right next to the Mithraeum, from the fantastic artist Christina Iglesias, who's a Spanish artist, studied chemical science in the Basque country, studied ceramics and drawing in Barcelona, and then sculpture in London. And she makes these incredible installations in urban scapes. And what she's doing here in this work, Forgotten Streams, is evoking the Walbrook as it was in its natural state before the great development of the urban city of London. So we have these metallic tree roots fusing and weaving in together, and a trickle of water running through them as well. This wonderful sense of the ecology and environment and biodiversity of the landscape at the time prior to all these great buildings of modernity. And I love this from a transdisciplinary perspective, and we can talk about time and the sacred in a really 3-dimensional model here. So the Thames, as many rivers, I've mentioned the River Shannon, is a place, one might say, of liquid culture or liquid cultures. And for example, that can be seen in the deposition of material culture, such as this metalwork here from the early Bronze Age flat axe. This is known as to be of an Irish type, linking myself to you, back again there, Lisa. And this shield known as the Battersea Shield here. Now, this shield is interesting. I want to link back to my comment on the Latin water culture, because it's linked to that with these curling, curvilinear, twirling designs that look like water, that look like water birds that come in and out of view, and this very strange helmet from Waterloo Bridge. These 2 objects would never have functioned as useful objects in their role. The shield would never have protected you in any conflict. This helmet would never have protected you in any way. They are metaphors for something. And they are metaphors for something that are placed within the deep metaphor of the river itself. This is a time of no formal religion, so we often talk about cult practices here of liquid states and water cults. And in fact, we can then link that also to the contemporary river. And in fact, the River Thames today is a sacred river for the modern day communities that live in and around the city itself. So we can find on the Thames foreshore, for example, as has been found here, and these are in the Museum of London in London, a statue of Vishnu, the Hindu god of Vishnu. And it's said that the source of the Ganges flows from the toe of Vishnu. And these little ceramic lamps here that are associated with the Hindu festival of light of Diwali. So for the Hindu community living in London, Thames is today a sacred river, and they make offerings to the river, and it's part of that wonderful sense of the sacred itself. The Thames itself being a product of centuries of cultural flow and cultural exchanges, that the water itself is a sacred substance. And in fact, the water is, one might say, a matter of life and death. And I've given you here a link from John Denman's topographical poetry here, where water, let's say, the mortal life to meet eternity. I also want to talk about the materiality of water and the objects that we find associated with them. And this metalwork is produced in a way that has the quality of water, these liquid states of water, types that transform and are transformed by the sacred. So the metalwork in its production of solid copper and ore and tin goes from solid state to a liquid state. It is fused and melted to make the metal objects, for example, that I've just shown you, back to a solid state, to the artifact itself, back to a liquid state as it's placed in a sacred ritual way into the water, from solid to liquid, to solid to liquid, in the liquid flow of the river. And we can engage with the notion of sacred here as a form of interplay, as water is a source of life, and water is very much part of spiritual life as well. So here I link to phenomenology, and that links very beautifully also to Lisa's felt sense discussion in her presentation here, that water is experience, and that this can give us a real sense of sacred phenomenology. This photograph is a great example of that. This was taken in a couple of months ago, just by the River Thames. I just finished teaching some students from Notre Dame here, and we were just by the river. The sun was setting, and the Thames turned pink. And this pink liquid, this pink water, flowed past us and beyond us and through us. And if I want to be deeply phenomenological now, and I am a phenomenologist, I can quote Maurice Merleau-Ponty here: visible and movable, my body is a thing among things caught in the fabric of the world. And here we can say that our bodies in this image, if we're looking at this image, caught in the fabric of the liquid of the river, this pink spectacle, this pink experience, transformed by the sunset, transforming us as we're near and by it. How could a drop of water know themselves to be river, and yet the river flows on? There are many practical lenses of sustainability. I think Lisa and I could talk endlessly about them, and they have been covered in a variety of ways: the key performance indicators, sustainable development goals, planetary boundaries. I'm not going to talk about those here, because what Lisa and I had a few days ago was a fantastic discussion around the idea of a new lens of sustainability, and that new lens of sustainability potentially being shaped and informed by the sacred. That is, that the sacred is the guiding inquiry into us thinking and engaging and understanding the sustainability of water and these liquid states. I'm just going to summarize that with an extract from a poem, To Be Transdisciplinary. And that comes from Raymond Carver in his poem, Where Water Comes Together with Other Water. I love creeks and the music they make, and rills in glades and meadows before they have a chance to become creeks. I may even love them best of all for their secrecy. I almost forgot to say something about the source. Can anything be more wonderful than a spring? But the big streams, they have my heart too. And the places streams flow into rivers, the open mouths of rivers where they join the sea, the places where water comes together with other water. These places stand out in my mind like holy places. Okay, let's just stop there. And we can open up the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That was just amazing and actually kind of very poignant. I kind of felt close to tears with your poem there, Faye. So did you want to pose something to the audience first, or did you want to have some questions?
I think we can go for some questions. Lisa, how do you feel about that? And then we can talk about our idea. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask those who are in our audience today, if you have questions, please put them into the chat box, and we'll come to you. But I do have like a question I want to pose to both of you to start off with, actually. Thank you, Faye, for including my Roman tablets. And Lisa, you talked as well, which also again touched me because of my family from Tipperary, and we are so into the mountains and the lakes around Tipperary. So I have this, as you were both talking, I was thinking, well, there is a sense of rebirth that comes with these places. So when you go to Kylemore, we come as people who are coming from very busy lives, from potentially built up areas, and you come to somewhere like Kylemore and you kind of almost have this sense of renewal, rebirth through the landscape, the water, the quietness, and it almost reinforces why it's so important that we preserve and we look out and we encourage these places to develop in a kind of sustainable way. And then similarly with Faye's work, we talked about Bath, and Bath being that place where it was very sacred for renewal of the body and rebirth of the body, because the Romans believed that it would have been helpful for people to cure their ailments and things like that. But then also simultaneously, when we talk about the Thames, it's rebirthing all these wonderful objects that have been lost to time, and so there is this sense of rebirth and renewal that comes from the waters. Is that something you've both thought about and considered in your kind of thoughts about sustainability and how people approach those bodies of water?
Okay, well, I wanted to hark back to what Faye mentioned in that beautiful quote from Antoine Exubery, because it reminds me of a speech that David Foster Wallace gave to a graduating class at Kenyon College. And it's about like two fish in a water, and one fish the parable is one fish turns to the other fish and says, how's the water today? And the other fish says, what water, right? Like, so I think when we're thinking about sustainability and the climate, like, I think we take for granted that we're in the water, right? And when we go to places like Kylemore and to places like Bath, where you have this maybe a sense of reconnecting and kind of unplugging from the noise, then you get more of a sense of the water that we're in. But we get so busy, and I think probably the biggest issue with sustainability and climate change and addressing it in a comprehensive way is that we don't acknowledge consciously that we're in it. Like, we take elements of it, but when you're faced with the sacred and you see, or you have the experience of the sacred in the water, then you bring a consciousness to it. And I think that's what the power of certain landscapes has for us, to bring us to a certain consciousness of the sacred. And it's by being exposed to those places that you can connect or reconnect to an awareness, or perhaps even a way of living more compassionately in this world. That was my first take on it. Faye.
Yeah, that's so as you're talking there, Lisa, I'm just reminding myself of the kind of lexicon of sustainability. And one of the key words for that is flourishing. And flourishing offers us a great lens of model of way to think about that, because it reminds us of the three-dimensional thinking behind that. So the sacred is dependent and many things according to what is sacred to you. So sacred for a Buddhist. I talked about the sacred Hindu river. It can mean different things to us in different moments in our lives, at different times in our lives as well. So there's a kind of collective sense of the sacred, and then there's our own individual sacredness. For example, the little rituals that we take place, or we happen to take place in our lives at that particular time. So if we're mindful of that, of the nuance of the sacred, and the many strands and webs and threads and interactions, at least entanglement theory, which is something that I touched upon in a slide. Entanglement theory, the relationship between people and things and people and people, things and things, and on and on and on and on. Then we can start to, in a sense, give a bit of space to the language that we're using around sustainability. A little bit more nuanced, a little bit more opening it up for us. And I find that very fruitful. I find this whole idea of the concept of the sacred and applying that to sustainability can be really powerful, because if we take that as a point of sitting down and having this conversation, and Lisa's conversations around Kylemore and these sacred ecologies that she's talking about and sacred depositions, then with all of this informed sense, we can go back to issues of climate change and flood and event and responsibilities that we all have for our sustainable futures, with this great nuance, with this great understanding. In a sense, it's an opportunity to open up many more conversations around that. And once you do that, and Lisa and I talk a lot about the power of grassroots activity, the power of the conversation, then we can potentially see something really extraordinary happening.
We might have one question out there. Hugo, are you out there? And can you turn your mic on, perhaps?
Yes, hello, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you. Wonderful. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it's less of a question, sort of more of a comment. Firstly, Lisa and Faye, thank you for the talk. They were both really great. But you mentioned flood, Faye, which of course I've directly thought about the situation on the east coast of Australia at the moment, where there's severe flooding. And I just thought that this presentation was really quite relevant, because in Australia, the First Nations peoples and the Indigenous people of the land have a huge importance of the sacredness of the environment and the country they live on. And when there were the bushfires a couple of years ago, there were huge movements for why aren't we taking these practices that they've had for generations of regenerating the land with planned burnings to prevent bushfires. And of course, the country was ravaged by bushfires and there was lots of damage. And now we've got floods again, where we could be saying, well, why don't we look at these practices they use, which talks about belonging to the land, a sense of understanding, being one with the land you live on. So, maybe if we can, as you were saying, have a new lens of looking at sustainability, we'd be able to incorporate these and then, prevent natural disasters like this. So I thought it was, really interesting to see, especially Lisa, he talked about at St. Benedict, some of the other, practices they had there. And I guess every culture is so rich around the world, and they've all got, many different ways of bringing this sacredness in. So I thought it was really good. Just a little comment there, I guess.
Thank you, Hugo. Lisa, Faye, did you want to respond to that?
Hugo, very welcome. And thanks for the comment there. Hugo, were you part of the Meeting of the Waters program with, no. Okay. Because we did a lot of work. Do you know the work of Tracy Benson and others? We all gathered together and did a big coming together with Indigenous communities on cultural flow and water. If not, Hugo, send me an email and I'll connect you to that, because there's a great sense of resource and conversation and films around that. It was a really good program put together, and sorry to hear about all the floods that are taking place there. It's really rather catastrophic in places there too. But that particular program was really engaged with exactly what you were talking about there, with in terms of the kinds of knowledge that we bring to this conversation, and in particular of the role and importance of Indigenous communities' knowledge and engagement and relationship with the landscape and with the water, which rather than say fundamentally different to other ideas or Western ideas of that, it just offers us an insight into the variability of what water means to us from a variety of standpoints. So I'm delighted you're here, and thanks very much for your comment.
I suppose,
Lisa, did you say
yeah,
that?
I was just going to add, I think what we can learn, and I think what happens, like that's the power of, I suppose, myth, legends, and storytelling, though, like, you know, what the rituals and behaviors that we observe here in Ireland or we study are actually, you know, quite common in other, you know, other countries. So I see similarities and symbols, and Faye, through her work, I'm sure can attest to that. You see a sort of link to other and really unattached. So on it, like, you know, there's been, because we live in such a liminal space in Ireland, there's very little adulteration, I suppose, of the landscape. So you have these sort of symbols that become profound in the history of Ireland. But I think it resonates globally, because there are symbols that and especially around water and water rituals that I've observed in Ireland that I've seen in other cultures. It's, you know, and similar even figures that are affiliated with rivers. And there's this wonderful sort of Irish figure of the banshee that foretells the death, and that has a correlation in Mexico of a kind of washerwoman who washes the clothes of the dead, right? So there's symbols and figures that connect us, and that's the beauty of myth. It connect us as a humans globally. But what I feel with when we talk about Aborigines and when we talk about, like, is this connection to the land that they inherently have, and that we need to read, you know, in the modern world really needs to, and especially in the context of the Anthropocene era that Faye had showed in her slide, that we really have to, like, really interrogate our rituals at the moment and what we value, right? Our rituals and behaviors and what we value. So I feel that, you know, when we look at the UN's sustainability development goals, they're all interconnected, right? You know, you can't solve one without 4 or 5 others. So ending poverty, you know, it addresses multiple issues, right? So we you know, including, you know, education and accessibility to education, which then leads on to other, you know, sustainability goals that, you know, we need to address as a whole. So I think that comment was very apropos, and what we're seeing in Australia and what we're seeing with climate around the world is just sort of endemic of what we're experiencing through climate change.
Thank you for that, Lisa. We are getting close to the end of time, unfortunately, and so we're going to have to wrap it up. But any final thoughts, Faye? You wanted to propose something to everybody. We don't have time to have a discussion about it, but did you want to leave a final thought with everyone?
It was the final slide where the text had that proposition, and the proposition was coming from this fantastic conversation Lisa and I had a couple of days ago, where we were both leaning back in our chairs and meandering down our thoughts and having this great synergy taking place, which is regarding the sustainable lenses, the models, the heuristics, the ways of thinking that Lisa and I know so well, particularly over the past year with the work that we've been doing. And there was a point in that conversation where we really pondered on the idea of, as I mentioned in the presentation, thinking about a new model of sustainability. Yeah? And for this point, it's in the water, but it could have wide implications. A new model of sustainability where the sacred is the primary driver or the primary lens through which you look there. What would that look like? How would that work? And what can it offer us in this work, in this model for this particular presentation on sustainability and water, on this notion of liquid states? Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to pick up on that.
I think it's the, you mentioned prisms, like it's like looking at sustainability through a prism that, when the light shines through it, you see it reveals another dimension or another layer that we can, and a way of addressing or revealing a way of addressing these topics. So I think when we think of water and the kind of multidisciplinary ways of approaching it, I think that through the prism of the sacred will really help us, to engage and create, again, across disciplines in addressing the sort of issues that we talk, and maybe invigorate and like a renewed interest in trying to combat these things, and maybe from just a different sort of light.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both. That's definitely given us food for thought, certainly. And it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you talk so passionately about your topics. I want to say thank you to you both again. And also thank you to all our speakers. It has been, our speakers, our attendees. It's been great to have you with us today. We hope you enjoyed today's event, and we will kind of be continuing our London research seminars. We have our final London research seminar, which will take place on the 30th of March. And that's in collaboration with the Centre for Catholic Studies at Durham University, and will feature Elizabeth Powell and Helen Kilburn. And that will promises to be absolutely fascinating. So please check that one out. Please join us if you're able. And also, if you want to continue this sustainability conversation, we have Ellie Cosgrave giving a talk tomorrow evening virtually as well. So if you want details on that, that's in our chat box at the moment as well. So please do sign up to that. We are continuing with our conversation about sustainability tomorrow evening. But thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Good night.